love the garden, and I think that the whole garden experience is another part of the vocational training,
Mm.
that should be included in the curriculum. People talk about relationships, and they're usually talking about relationships with other people and not our relationship to the natural world. And I think that in this modern society, we're losing this relationship with the natural world that is also very scary. But the garden is the classroom. My teacher felt like you could learn more in 1 hour in the garden than you could all day in the classroom. And when he was Alan Chadwick was at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and they wanted to confine him to the classroom. He rebelled. You can't develop a relationship with the natural world just looking at pictures and books and reading information. You've got to be out there smelling the flowers and digging in the earth and having the relationship with the bees and the butterflies and all of the pollinators and all of the forces, that create life. I think people really need to know how to grow food and how to increase the natural yield by understanding the whole cycle that Alan Chadwick called the revolution of us, and it's got a rhythm. And once you get into the natural rhythm, then you have the ability to increase the natural yield, and that's the increase that really causes humanity to prosper. And so much of that knowledge of what Alan called the revolution of us is no longer included in the curriculum. It was quite an interesting journey from the biodynamics to actually creating an economy around these ideas and producing all of this beautiful organic biodynamic food that was so much more flavorful and nutritious than what we're getting off of these commercial farms. My daughter Nasha had a bag of potatoes that were sprouting and said, "Here, Dad, plant these potatoes," and they looked like normal potatoes, but I planted them and none of them really came up, and I thought, what's the matter with these potatoes? And then I remembered the potato is one of the most genetically modified plants. Potatoes and corn, probably the two plants that bioengineering has been tampering with, and once you start messing with the DNA of these plants, they lose their ability to reproduce themselves, and that's one of the reasons why they banned GMOs from Mendocino County because you bring those genetically modified organs and the cross pollination can screw everything up on the farm. And Mendocino County did not want it at the time, but it seems like today that's another real battle we face is how do we uh, turn the clock back and reverse all of this genetically genetic engineering that's already been done. And it's it's very frightening, really, when you realize what's happening to the seed stock and the fact that these seeds are no longer viable, and the only way you can plant a garden is if you buy this genetically modified stock from Monsanto or whatever other seed company is producing. And there should be a law against, I think, patenting these seed strains and modifying them so the the farmer can't save his own seed anymore.
But yeah, I was heavily influenced by Alan Chadwick, and Alan Chadwick's story is an interesting story because Alan originally came to California to uh, head up the agricultural department at University of California at Santa Cruz. But at the time, there was a real interest in organic horticulture. Yeah. And they also, when they set up the university there, they were kind of modeling it after the British university system, and Alan Chadwick being British and being a gardener and connected with the British Horticultural Society and all the leading horticulturalists of the time. It was quite unusual to bump into him out in this remote spot in Mendocino County. But he was the one that really brought the idea of Waldorf education, of biodynamic farming to Mendocino County. And, we really felt like we were going to really make a change in society, introducing these new ideas of how to grow more vegetables on less land one would ever think possible. Yeah. And it was quite exciting. And the garden project was quite close to where my home was. I was just east of Medicine Mountain, and the garden project, which was about 15 acres just south of Medicine Mountain, a place that had so much promise of changing the direction that we were moving in at the time, moving away from war and exploitation toward living in harmony and sustainability. But Ronald Reagan even came and visited our garden and remarked on how nice it was to see all of these young people creating this beautiful garden instead of protesting. He said that usually when he went to visit a university or a place where young people were working, there was all this protest, and he didn't enjoy it very much. Right? Yeah, it was back to the land, back to the source, what Alan Chadwick called origin, back to original being, back to Eden.
Actually, when he had a falling out at the university, he went to Saratoga and started a community garden at the Oddfellows Lodge in Saratoga. And that's where Richard Wilson found him and invited him to come and see this beautiful valley in Mendocino County that had never been polluted with commercial agriculture at all. It was pretty pristine. And he was very impressed when he first arrived in Round Valley, the biodiversity, all of the wild plants that existed there, the insect life, the idea of the wild river, of this beautiful Eel River watershed that we were a part of, which Richard, did succeed in getting Ronald Reagan to set it apart as a wild and scenic corridor, really, not to be developed.
Even though I was coming out of the city I had done a little bit of gardening, but, not on the kind of scale that Alan was working. And so I immediately recognized and joined the project and taught woodworking. That was the first wood shop that I really set up. And, it was an old converted chicken house. But the whole experience of working with him, and I was technically one of the staff. I wasn't, I really wasn't an apprentice. I was a staff member teaching wood shop and getting paid. It wasn't very much money, but it was better than nothing. I think they were giving me something like $150 a month or something ridiculous. But and I started going to the lectures that he was giving and meeting the people and realizing that in order for him to really do what he was trying to do, he needed me. And I pretty much volunteered. They didn't ask me to come join them. I volunteered, and I had quite a few tools, and moving on to a piece of raw land with very few tools to work with. was a real handicap. So I got out my tool chest and furnished quite a few tools initially, to make all of the things work. And most of the tools I had were hand tools because that's what I'd been collecting. Because I felt like at the time that we couldn't really depend on all of the technology that was developing, and we had to go back to simpler, more basic ways. And so I had collected quite a few hand tools, and of course once we got moving on the project and realizing that we really needed a wood shop to facilitate it and to use as a classroom, and we converted this old chicken house mostly with salvaged material because there was some money, but we were always working on a shoestring. We seemed never to have the kind of financial support that one really would need to develop a horticultural school. And but it's good training to start from scratch, start with nothing.
An incredible organic gardening experience. The beautiful gardens that we established there. We grew just about everything in the way of fruits and vegetables. And Covelo is a small town but they were having a farmer's market at the time, and we'd take our produce to the farmer's market. We also set up a little, remodeled the garage and set up a little store where we could sell produce to anybody that came and wanted to get vegetables. And there again, he wanted this kind of circular stand that had these wooden crates where you could put and display all of these vegetables on two tiers, and in kind of a lug box fashion. And the making of seed flats, of lug boxes, of all of this supportive items that are needed to run not only a garden, but to be able to market the produce as well. He was slowly working up. The first animals he added were the poultry, and then the bees came next. When Chadwick was here, his ultimate goal was to do all the tilling with horses, but was never able to achieve that. So all the tilling we did by hand with a strong arm and a spade, and broke a number of handles in the process. But that was one of the things that they were looking toward me to replace all of these handles. And I was experimenting with different local woods to see what would make the best handle for a spade or a fork. And that was another really enlightening experience for me to experiment with all these different woods.
But Alan was, he was very into doing everything by hand. He even had a fit when I brought the first table saw on scene. He wanted us to do everything with hand technique, all the tilling of the soil, as well as the building of the facility. But I convinced him that we needed at least the table saw, to try to rip boards by hand was just not practical anymore. And he had ambitious ideas, building a greenhouse and cold frames and all of the trellising and everything that was needed to create the kind of garden that he was creating there, which was, quite extensive.
Quite interesting. The chicken house that Alan Chadwick had designed for the chickens. And as a matter of fact, that was the only time he ever really got angry at me, because the nesting boxes, I had built them with the material that I was using, which was 1x12 pine, and so all of the nesting boxes were 12x12x12, little cubes that were all running, basically along the floor. They were one step up from floor level uh, for places for the chickens to lay eggs. But I didn't really consult the master, and he got very angry at me because he said the nesting boxes were too small. 12x12x12 wasn't big enough. They needed to be 14 to 16x16x16. And so I had to tear it all out and redo it. And I felt kind of foolish for not inquiring, because I was raised on a chicken farm, and that was approximately the size of the nesting boxes that we had for our chickens, were roughly 12x12. But we were commercial egg growers, and we were trying to squeeze as many nesting boxes in an area as possible. But Alan was, he was not for squeezing out the mass production. He was all about quality. He said, if you're going to raise strawberries to make money, forget it. It's going to fail. When you grow strawberries, you grow them to produce the most beautiful and luscious strawberry possible. And when that's your focus, the best quality and not the price, then you'll succeed. If you go for the price first, it'll be a disaster, was, his philosophy. So, if you're producing eggs, you want to produce the best egg possible. And that's what he insisted upon, and everything we did in the garden. He wanted it done using hand technique. He wanted, everything was hand watered. You had to be in touch and synchronicity with the plants that you're raising. And how could you tell if they were getting what they needed if you never looked at them? You were letting some automatic system do all the watering. And This watercolor image is of the workshop that we built at the garden project in Covelo under the direction of Alan Chadwick. It was dubbed the Village Garden Project, under the heading of the Institute of Man and Nature, which was what Richard Wilson had, the framework that he had developed. But in order to keep the gardens active and do all of the supportive work, which was, included tool racks to hold the tools for the apprentices, fixing broken handles, and building cold frames and greenhouses. And in order to do all of those things, to accomplish all that, we needed a shop. We needed a woodworking shop. And this is the old chicken house that was approximately 12, 14 feet wide and maybe 20 feet long. It wasn't a big space, but it was large enough, and I built the two workbenches that were in there, the tool cabinets, and was teaching the Alan Chadwick's apprentices woodworking skills as part of the whole project. It was really the marriage of horticulture and handcraft. Of course, the health and the healing aspect was also very important to Alan Chadwick, and he really, his dream was to create the world's most complete herb garden that had all of these herbs growing in locations on this circle. There were all of these different aspects in relationship to the sun, and it was arranged, as a huge circle with each ring of bed, and it was terraced. So the lowest was the center, which was a pond, water, and the pond was shallow at one end and it spiraled down into the deep end, and all of the aquatic herbs, both from a deeper water environment to the shallow bog environment, was all in this spiral, which was the center. And then each ring was terraced, and it created all of these spaces with different aspects to the sun, different drainages, and it went up from the pond in the center to, I think there were 3, maybe 4 levels in the herb garden itself. And he actually wanted to plant this herb garden. It was quite large. With the herbs moving up and all of these medicinal herbs. And then he wanted to also create a library which was in a circle, where the books that told about the medicinal qualities of each herb would be located in the library in relationship to where they were grown in the herb garden. It was quite a dream. 1972 to 1978 was when Alan actually left, and he was feeling like Covelo was too remote, and at that time he got an offer to move to Virginia, uh, to a piece of property in the Shenandoah River Valley, and he was supported at the time by the people that were publishing the uh, Mother Earth news. So here we are in this very small town. The population was listed as 1,500 souls. There were a few more probably than that, but it was too small an arena for him. He had much bigger ideas, and even though he really valued the fertility and the diversity of Round Valley, he decided to take this offer and move to Virginia, not far from Washington, D.C., and create a garden there. And so he, he left us, but just before he left, I remember one day he came into the wood shop, and all of the apprentices that were studying with him at the time would have probably jumped at the opportunity to go with him to Virginia and create this beautiful biodynamic garden, just outside of Washington, D.C. But the only one he really wanted was Stephen Decatur of Live Power Farm, and practically begged Stephen to go with him. But Stephen was in love with Gloria at the time, and Stephen and Gloria went off and started their own farm and garden, which became a community supported CSA, community supported agricultural model. And anyway, Alan was just delighted with Round Valley when he first got there. But after he had been there a while, he felt like it was really kind of too far out off the beaten path, and he wasn't attracting the following that he felt this movement really needed to attract to really turn the tide, turn the thinking away from making war and genetically modifying everything to a more organic approach. Although he chose the highest standards of organic, which in his mind was the biodynamic, combining the philosophies of Rudolf Steiner with the French market, the small, 5-acre market gardens in France that he thought were the most efficient and the best way to grow fruits and vegetables on a small is beautiful scale. And the whole idea of the farm as a living organism that has this life that needs to be nurtured, and the animals, the livestock, the the fruits, the soft berries, the nuts, were all part of it, and he wanted to include, the whole realm of life in this living organism that became the biodynamic farm. And it was, a beautiful idea. And in the center was the herb garden, because the herb garden represented the origin. That's where the whole thing began, back in Eden. In the herb gardens, the herbs were the most origin plant species, and so that became the center of the garden, and everything else radiated out from that. The soft fruits, the berries, the nut cops, the vegetables, and the grains, all of those elements. It was, for me, quite an experience to work with a master like himself that had this vast knowledge of growing plants. He had created a garden for the British Admiralty in South Africa, and had been, kind of an amateur gardener all his life, as well as a Shakespeare actor. And his biography is quite amazing, Mr. Chadwick. We called him Maestro, and it was, very, very informative for me to work with him and for him. I really was the craftsman at the master's side, and delighted in the beautiful gardens that we established there at the foot of Medicine Rock. It was quite a fabulous experience, and I felt very lucky to be there. And I read this quote that said that when you're on the path and you meet the master, then you want to stay on that path, the path that you were on when you met the master. And I really felt like, I was on that path, and I had met the master, and he had put me in charge of the wood shop because I had more experience in woodworking than any of the other apprentices, because I had majored in industrial arts at Long Beach State, and I had taken the classes. The education was very important to him. And, he said there were basically 3 ways that a person could get an education. They could go to the university, they could study with a master, do an apprenticeship with a master, and the other was to teach yourself. But the teaching yourself was the longest route, and would take probably your whole lifetime to really master a skill if you took that route. And he considered there are 4 levels of mastery, and the first was the apprenticeship. The second was the journey, apprentice, journeyman, where you learn the skills, and then you go out in the world and you practice those skills. And then you become a scholar next. You begin to understand the deeper meaning of all of these skills and tasks that you're doing. And then you become a master. After serving an apprenticeship, doing the journey, learning the philosophy behind it all, and then you become a master. I had a wood carver at one of the events that we did at the Boonville Fairgrounds that had a lot of carvings on display. You know, he was quite good, and he asked me, "Do you consider yourself a master?" And I had to think about it for a little while, and I said, "No, I'm still the craftsman at the master's side." The craftsman at the master's side.